So let's go ahead and get started. Aim, you asked me a question the other day when we were on a walk, and what was that question?
I asked Doc, why did he write this book? So that lasted, well, first he said to make a lot of money. And then I just, thanks a lot for that. But no, then we ended up walking for a good hour and nonstop conversation. So why did you write the book?
Yes, and it's not just me. As you'll see, Amy, who is the my business partner in Royer Neuroscience, is a huge part of this book. So why did we write this book together? We wrote this book more so than anything else. We really feel like this is something that is more of a mission or a vision that we have, that's been laid on our hearts, that has been unfolding for close to 35 years, as we have had our own experience along the way, clinically, but also personally, friends, family, clients that have experienced the tsunami in their life. And we just have a message that we feel, not we feel, we know needs to be heard. And it was very interesting. I would say about 2 years ago, we were working with a writer, Forge Your Inner Armor, was written by him. And we were talking about another book. And we came up with this idea a couple years ago and said, this is really a story that needs to be heard, not a Forge Your Inner Armor is great, but it explains more of what inner armor is about. This is more of a cultural, societal thing that needs to be discussed. And so we really felt that God laid on our hearts to do this. And as we started to progress, we kind of hit a bunch of roadblocks. And almost a year ago, we we said this just isn't going in the right direction. We kind of looked over the draft and we're like, this just isn't good enough. It's not where we want to be. And so we kind of shelved it and we went on, just a break, but we knew it was important because there's things that happen in life that are like innovative, creative ideas that you come up with, Royer Neuroscience, Inner Armor. And then there's other things that happen because there's a gap or there's a problem in a system, and it's like it has to be fixed. And these are how different things are created or developed. Some are new ideas, and some are like, there's a problem that if we don't step in, uh, this is only going to get worse, right? And so that's what tsunami is stepping into that problem, right? And so we kind of put it behind us, and then towards the end of the summer, it was like, you got to get back to that. And we had a good friend of ours who's a writer that we sent it to. She looked over it and said, you just need to rebuild this thing. And so then Amy and I just sat down and we started pounding away. And this really became something that we spent many days, weeks on. And we really feel like the product is, we hope you like it. Um, but it's a message that needs to be heard. It needs to be heard because there are major, major gaps in our culture and society that we need to address. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the next 20 minutes and we're going to give you an overview of the book. That doesn't mean that you don't read the book. Okay. It's very short. It's you should be able to read this book in about 2 hours, depending on how fast of a reader you are. We will have a audio version of that as well. So you might go about it that way, but recommend that you look through all of the content in the book. But we're going to give you a chapter overview. So in order to do that, we have a picture for each chapter, and we're going to kind of talk through that. Okay, so here is the first chapter. First chapter is called The Unstoppable Wave, Confronting the Mental Health Tsunami. And some of you might say, what's the mental health tsunami? And it doesn't take much looking around to realize that we have a problem going on with two major things, and that's anxiety and depression. In the lifespan of my youngest child, we have had an increase in 20 some years. We've had an increase of over 35% in the United States in anxiety and depression. Let's rephrase that a little bit. Let's go back even further. In 1990, on the front page of Newsweek, it had a picture of Prozac, and it said, this medicine, over basically summarized what it was talking about. It said, these SSRIs, these medicines will eradicate depression and anxiety as we know on the planet in the next 10 to 15 years. If you've tracked this, you've realized this has been the furthest thing from eradicating. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And there's no stopping this tidal wave, the tsunami that's coming on us. And to give you an idea, there's over 40 million people in the United States that have anxiety. That's clinical anxiety. That's not just the, hey, I've got anxiety. This is like it's been diagnosed as anxiety. That's 40 million, which is 20% of our population. So next time you're in Starbucks and you look around, count 5 people. One of those people has a significant clinical anxiety disorder. Then in depression, we know that there's 20 million people that have clinical, not just down or dysthymia, but clinical major depression to the point that they probably can't work. And that's 20 million people, which is 10%. So we have 30% of the people in the United States that are experiencing clinical depression or clinical anxiety. And only about 27 to 30% of those people are actually getting treatment at all for it. So even if that we could stop it right now, there's nothing that says we will. And so it's estimated in 25 years that close to 70 to 80% of the United States will have a combination of anxiety or depression. That's crazy, right? To think about. This thing is an epidemic upon us and nothing's stopping it. And so we have to find a way to step in. And that takes us to chapter 2.
All right, so we're going to talk about chapter 2. Just a quick takeaway from chapter 1 is something that Doc and I have talked about when we look at those numbers that he just talked about is our family represents 10 adults. So anytime we gather with our family, if we're being realistic, 2 in the room are struggling with a clinical level of anxiety. Like it's just that close to home. And maybe it's me. I mean, we all have so much stress coming into our lives and coming at us that it's just super important to us to realize no one is alone in it and there is more that can be done. So chapter 2 is thinking solutions, where we talk about the conventional approaches and we give credit to the current modalities, which would be the medication approach and the therapy approach. The thing that's difficult about those 2 approaches is one is that the rate of the need is much higher than the supply of the help. So we have an issue straight out of the chute, even if you do have the insurance coverage, that it's very difficult to get the adequate amount of help that you may need. But the other thing that is something we are really, really called to in our practice is looking upstream. And when we look at the human body, we totally believe that we have to connect the brain and the body together. And what we see often in conventional medicine and in psychology is people want to separate the 2. So what we are doing is looking at how we can connect the 2. And we're not saying in our chapter 2 that we don't want anything to do with medication and therapy. We're just saying we would like to add this approach that looks upstream at the autonomic nervous system. So more of a idea of an adjunct or a synergy, something that actually makes the conventional therapy even more powerful. And in a perfect world, we typically see in our practice that a lot of times people will begin on a medication, which is like a life raft in a bad situation, and then we never like to see a medication without a therapy talk therapy alongside of it. But what we want to see then is, of course, adding this inner armor training that we're going to talk about as we go on to the next chapters. But that being the thing that kind of moves the whole problem or issue or concern forward in a positive direction.
Great. You actually did get through that in 2 to 3 minutes. I'm amazed. Okay,
I'm good.
go. And I'm the one who's
I
like
like to meet the
battling.
requirement.
Okay, good work. Okay. So chapter 3, there's 9 there's 233 chapters. So I know there's 9 chapters. Chapter 3 is becoming a first responder, and this is talks a lot about my experience going through, starting with my educational experience, how I was going into counseling, but I really got attracted to testing and objective data and neuropsychological testing. And so then decided to go on and get a clinical degree with neuropsych emphasis. And then out of that, went straight into psychiatric hospitals, so working inpatient in psychiatric hospitals. And this is where my eyes really opened to, there's nothing that's stopping this thing. And these diagnoses are wrong most of the time. And our service was trying to help the psychiatrists who are at the top of the food chain on this understand, what is it that you're treating, what are you trying to medicate, and seeing rehospitalizations over rehospitalizations at the psychiatric hospital, and really seeing the real difficulty in mental health at an extreme level of schizophrenia and bipolar and psychosis, which then led into my experience at the Children's Hospital, where the local children's hospital in West Michigan needed some type of behavioral health system. And so I was able to, fortunately, be at the right place at the right time, and became division chief of behavioral medicine, and helped all these different specialty clinics like brain tumor clinic and sickle cell clinic and hematology and um, fetal alcohol syndrome, and all these different clinics come alongside them to understand how the brain affects these children and adolescents. And that's where I really started to see the overlap of brain and body. So I've been really trained to look downstream, okay, behaviors, diagnose them, and then start doing something. But what happened because of all the medical overlay is I started to look at the brain more, especially in the neurology clinic, the Tourette's clinic that we formed, a lot of those things. We started to look what's going on physiologically, and this really started the beginning stages of upstream work. And then out of there, spending about 10 years in the Children's Hospital, started to see, man, this overdiagnosis of things that is absolutely wrong, because most of these people are getting diagnosed by somebody who really hasn't had any neuropsych or clinical training, but the system is so overrun that anybody who can help is trying to make a diagnosis and move things on. But a lot of times what happens is a lot of people get misdiagnosed, and that leads to over medicine. And so then the original formation of Royer Neuroscience, which was back then pediatric behavioral specialists, happened. And it was right around that time that I said, the medicine's not cutting it. And it was in the early 2000s that we started to work with biofeedback, originally helping children learn to breathe and increase their body temperature through a very archaic device that then led into neurofeedback. And thank you to my 4 children who let me put leads on their heads for many, many years until I figured this stuff out. And Amy, I'd walk around following her with gel and paste to try to read EEGs. But that was our journey that has now eventually led to what is Inner Armor and Royer Neuroscience, but is built on a lot of different experiences along the way.
Perfect. So that is our chapter 3. So then we move into chapter 4, which actually is a discussion of a study that we did within our own company. And so what we did is use biofeedback and neurofeedback therapy in our office with all different age groups. And we did some testing pre and some testing post, and all the details are in the chapter. But I'm going to give you the results, so you will still want to read the chapter. But the most amazing thing happened is after the training, we retested these clients, and we had almost 83% of our anxiety clients had a clinically significant improvement in their symptoms. This is the downstream behaviors. And 81% of the clients with depression had clinically significant improvements. So this was a huge celebration because this blew talk therapy by this guy out of the water. And so it was like, wow, we really, really need to look at doing this. And the other thing was a big light came on, and that was the upstream light, where we were like, we need to work upstream to make these downstream changes. And the connection of the brain and the body was undeniable because we could see the data. We had brain waves changing, so we could see numbers. That's amazing. We had heart rate variability changing. So we're seeing literally these people's heart is adjusting differently in a more positive way. And we also had blood pressure changes.
Yeah.
So these major physical changes that came from biofeedback and neurofeedback. So at this point in the book, where we were at was like, we can't not do this. This is too good.
Yeah. And I think it's been that study that there was a lot going on in our previous company at that time, that we got the study out and we're just distracted by a lot of different things. But I went back to look at this with, 240, 300, 250 people that were clinically depressed and clinically anxious. They were 81 to 83% had gone into the normal range. And it's like, wait a minute, what is this? I've never seen anything like that. And that really kind of like started to get our engine turning, like we really need to be part of the solution. And so that was a very objective, quantifiable thing, about 2015, 2016. And before we get into the next chapter, 7, actually that's 4, this is 5, before we get into 6, and we talk about anxiety and depression in particular, it's really important at this moment that we stop and say, well, where did all this stuff come from? It's like, are Amy and Doc like just creating these, snake oil stuff in the basement? And it's not that at all. There's pioneers who've been way before us, like Nobel Prize winners. This is one of my favorite chapters, and I think Steve Moss, who's on here, he mentioned that too in his proofread of the book. Like, I just love this kind of stuff because you're looking at 150 years of so many people's hard work, but they didn't have PCs and Macs, They had to make like glass tubes to read saliva coming out of dogs while they were ringing a bell to figure out, oh, the autonomic nervous system upstream gets activated when I do this downstream behavior. And Ivan Pavlov is one of probably the greatest minds in medicine and also behavioral medicine combined. He kind of set the whole thing going. He ends up getting basically a grant from Russia that says you can do whatever you want to for as long as you want to, because you're inventing so many things, and wins the Nobel Prize. And then on to B.F. Skinner. And then we find out about Hans Selye, who actually coined the word stress about the body, which wasn't really coined until 1940. Can you believe that? We talk about stress like it's, we've used that word forever, but people didn't realize there's things in the environment that actually can affect me physiologically. And Selye is in there, and it's really cool. And then we start to get into, these guys have all these great ideas, these pioneers, but they just don't have the technology to measure things in real time. Yeah, I can ring a bell and a dog will salivate, but I can't read brainwave activity. That's like too complicated. Well, then you get Bill Gates and Steve Jobs come along, And they're like, hey, how about PCs that you can have in your home or carry in your on your phone, right? And we can read brainwave activity now in real time on our phone from any place in the world. We can see brainwave activity and we can train those brainwaves. So it isn't Royer Neuroscience, Tim and Amy, it isn't Inner Armor. It's like these giants who came before us. And we just happen to be right here and say, these giants created something that we can move forward with. I think you're going to love this chapter. It's a really fun chapter. Okay. Oh, I'm
Yeah,
going on
you
those.
get 3 in a row.
Oh my gosh.
These are more
How
in
did
his
shoot?
lane.
Okay. So, we got to understand a little bit like anxiety, depression, how does this work? There's all kinds of theories. If you go all the way back to Sigmund Freud, he would say that the psychodynamic thing for depression is anger turned inwards. You have some anger towards some type of parental figure, and you turn it inside, and you get depressed. And there are some validity to these different theories about depression and anxiety. And I don't think there's any one thing. I think it's a combination of different things. I'm very interpersonal in my theoretically how I think about psychology. And so I do think relationships either make you sick or relationships either make you healthy. And that has a lot to do with how we develop anxiety and depression. But in this book, we're really looking at the upstream physiological things that happen. And there can be all kinds of causes for that. That can be, spending too much time on the iPhone, not getting enough sleep, wrong diet. We're not going to get into all of those different things, but we are talking about physiologically what happens to the brain and the body. And the big player in this is something that you're going to learn about, which is the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, which is at the base of your brain, that talks to your pituitary gland, which then sends a message down to your adrenal glands, which release adrenaline. And anxiety, what happens is this HPA axis gets overactivated. Everything you see is a crisis. And you're going to like this part in the book where we talk about people with anxiety move from looking at probabilities, like, is it probable the roof could fall in right now? Not really. But is it possible? Yes, it is. And if somebody with anxiety is always looking at possibilities, and therefore the HPA axis is getting overactivated, and we get this over release of cortisol or adrenaline. And in depression, we're going to talk about the same physiological thing that happens, which leads to something called learned helplessness in the body, where adrenal fatigue sets in and the body can't keep up with the demand. But great book, a great chapter, good look at where the physiological underpinnings of this and why resilience is so important. Resilience is going to end up being a very significant theme in here. We talk about dynamic resilience. Shout out to Chris Casola at Liberty, who really coined that term, dynamic resilience. And even though I don't use your name in the book, Chris, you are the father of dynamic resilience, one of the shoulders of the giants that we built off of to get to this point. But dynamic resilience is talked about a lot. And so from there, we talk about these learned pathways, and then like how do we unlearn them? So chapter 6 is like how these learnings happen in anxiety and depression and form this cascade of behavioral responses. But are we stuck there? And this is where we talk about change. And this is where it starts to really open up into, wait a minute, what have we bought into about change? And what's happened is we've become a culture that is so reliant on what's called a ligand gated change, which is in your neurons and the synaptic clefts. There's neurotransmitters in there, and you can kind of alter those neurotransmitters and create different behavioral responses. And that's a chemical change. And we've been sold that bill of goods that that's the only way the brain can learn or change is if it's depression, it's this. You're going to use this chemical. If it's ADHD, it's this. If it's a sleep problems, it's this. If it's high blood pressure, it's this. And not that those things aren't helpful, but you're not meant to be, they are like kind of a life preserver. And if the life preserver is good when you're drowning, but if you're still out in the ocean 3 years later, that's not a good solution. And so you need to learn to swim. And so learning to swim is learning. Learning. The brain's greatest capacity is to learn. And so what we talk about in here is the ability to learn in the brain and how we can teach the autonomic nervous system, the upstream stuff, how to learn in such a way that it changes the downstream behaviors. Those aren't done overnight, but they're done in a way that they become permanent without constant relapse. And you'll learn about what happens every time you cycle into depression, what happens to the odds of you having another depressive episode in this chapter and how we learn about it. And you're also learn about the doorknob experience, which maybe when you get to it, you'll find it's kind of funny, that I experienced as an example of learning. So let's get into, you're taking over for the last two, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
I'm
let's
ready.
go.
We're gonna wrap it up. So, well, I guess you guys you'll really enjoy when you read those chapters that Doc was talking about, because it's a fresh take on things like anxiety and depression, because we sort of have, I think, just an idea in our mind, or we've labeled what those things are. But the way that he describes it in those chapters kind of opens your mind. In fact, we've already had like 2 or 3 people who did pre-reads on the book come to us and say, oh my gosh, that's me. Like, I never put that together.
Yeah.
So, and I definitely can see myself in both of those descriptions, and it's just super helpful when you can see yourself to then think, oh, there's something I can do about that. So that's where we come to right now with the swim classes for everyone. So as you're reading the book, something I feel like I hope we have in there is that we're all somewhere on a continuum
Yeah.
of mental health. And this isn't about like, oh, my cousin Susie really needs this book. This is about like also looking at where am I on this continuum and what am I doing about where I am on that continuum. So when I look at this chapter, this is where I start to get really excited, because this is where neurofeedback and biofeedback helped me. I was a busy mom with 4 little kids at home, and even if you have 4 good little kids, they're stressful. And then I have a busy husband who's Mr. Non-conventional, always swimming upstream. And it's just a stressful combination of life. And I was definitely in the waves for sure, of what we're talking about. And when biofeedback and neurofeedback came in front of me, it was more like another stress. Like, oh my gosh, what is Tim doing now? And trying to figure out, like, is this going to work to support a family with 4 children? Like, what in the world are we doing? But I was I was a willing guinea pig. And this stuff changed my life. And my life wouldn't be the same right now if I hadn't done this training and learned these principles. And the way that I function on a literal day-to-day basis has this structure underlying it about the upstream and the downstream. Like, I could get real emotional about it because it's really meaningful to me. Just a quick example is a couple years ago, 3 of our 4 children got married in the same year. One had a baby overseas, and there was another surgery, a brain surgery in there of one of our children. Just a wild year. And my underlying principle during that year was, you better sleep well and you better do your breathing, or you probably aren't going to look so great at the end of this year. And just how much strength and empowerment that gave me, that is probably my biggest reason for us investing our time in this book. Is like, I want my kids to have that. I want my friends to have that. And I want our clients to have that when they come and they're saying, I've tried everything and I just can't get my head above water. So anyway, that's what this chapter is starting to talk about. First, it talks about our struggles with trying to make this accessible to everyone. And anybody out there who's tried to do something non-conventional, you know what it's like. The first one through the wall is always bloody, or whatever that phrase is. Yes, we struggled, we fought, but it's like Doc says, it's the timing. Things come together. You'll find it in the book. And it just makes me smile how it did and does come together, even within the last 1 year of our practice. things have become so much more accessible, affordable, time efficient. These are the principles we're just chasing down. And so in the book, at the end of this chapter, we talk about a new concept with the neurofeedback and biofeedback, which is offering it in like a kiosk type setting. And there's two just amazing examples, one from a college setting and one from an elementary school setting. And I won't spoil the fun of reading those on your own. So that is chapter 8. And then the last chapter is 9. And yes, this is a picture of me standing up. Just kidding. This is one of us, everybody. This is one of us who has trained and is ready to face the waves. And you can see, like in my mind, I see her looking into them, like forward, and like it's not a look of fear and it's not running from the beach. It's full of possibility and hope, and it comes from the inner armor, or the going upstream and training our autonomic nervous system to be resilient. We're all going to have stress, and in fact, the word stress, as Doc said, was not originally like a bad term. We've kind of moved it in that direction, but stress was a measurement of how strong a beam was.
Mhm.
And so stress, like if it was a higher stress rating, that's a stronger beam. And that's kind of what I want to be, is that person that has the ability to withstand a higher amount of stress because of the preparation and the training. So chapter 9 is pure joy. It is stories of people who have done the program, and they're all various walks of life, and they're just delightful. I mean, I can't say it any better than they say it themselves. But I will say this, I can add another 1 or 2 or 3 more just from this work, my work week this week with clients. So this is just real stuff. It makes us super excited. I think some of the words that pop in my head that I would close with from my point of view is, everybody's so amazing as an individual, and we want to value each individual story. Like when someone comes in to us and said, like, this is my story and I've tried everything, I don't ever want to be like, roll my eyes and like, I've heard it before, because honestly, I haven't. They're all new. Everybody's story is unique to them. But we have this amazing universal principle among all of us as humans, and it is the autonomic nervous system, and the fact that it is trainable, or as Doc says, like the brain's capacity to learn is the biggest strength that we have. So we have this universal principle, and so it's just, the book is about taking that universal principle and gifting it to the individual and seeing what comes out of that. And I can't explain the amazing things I've seen with my own 2 eyes. Both of us were trained in conventional settings. I'm a nurse, he's a neuropsychologist, and we really had to think outside the box for a lot of this. But we also, I think, are seeing things that are outside the box of anything we were told that could happen. And so for us, the sky's the limit. And we keep training because we keep seeing our resilience, our dynamic resilience growing, and we think that's going to help us be better grandparents and and face the other kinds of waves that will always be coming our way, but face it the way this person is facing it, with anticipation versus fear and trepidation.
Yeah, and I think this person, you can see, like, not like the other pictures where the big tsunami was over them. The waves are kind of just coming in, but they're prepared. And you'll find out why I said prepared when you get to chapter 10.
Yes.
But they're prepared for when it comes. And you may have thought at the beginning that, well, I know that 1 out of 5 that Doc's talking about, that maybe I could get this book to, or I could talk about. But what you're really going to find out at the end, that it's not about the 1 out of 5. It's about the 5 out of 5. It's about all of us, because we will all experience something. And when that comes, are we ready for it? And this book is about preparing for that and the dynamic resilience that is for everybody, not just the friend of the friend, but for yourself. And so that's what makes it really exciting. We came along that as we were going through the book. Wait a minute, this is everybody. This isn't just, that one client I can think of. This is all of us experience these things at some level. And some of us may have the wave come tomorrow. And so how are we preparing today for tomorrow's wave? And how do we help the person who has been hit by the wave? So exciting. We're so glad that you joined us for our launch party.
Yeah, that was really a nice gift for you to give us.
Yes.
We appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us. Please put your name in the chat if you would like a book. And then if you'd like one for somebody else, we can either send it to you directly, or we can, if you want to give us their mailing address, however you want to do that. But everybody that's here at the launch party gets a free book, and for somebody else. Is that good?
We love it.
Okay. You guys have a great one. Okay. We'll see
Thanks,
you.
guys. Happy election night.
Yes.